I'm Mark Halperin.
And I'm John Heilemann. With all due respect to Amtrak, seems like you all have an itty-bitty problem with your branding.
They're called the Acela Primaries. But what does that mean?
For what's billed as the Acela Primary.
For what's billed as Acela? Is that how you say it?
For what's billed as the Acela Primary.
The Acela Primaries, the Acela Primary.
The accelerated primary.
Is it Acela train, Melissa?
Yes.
Acela train.
What some are calling the Acela Primary.
The Acela Primaries.
What some are calling the Acela Primary. Okay, anyway.
Acela, Amtrak Primary. It's been called a lot of different things today.
So named because Amtrak's famous Acela train,
The Acela, the primaries.
The Acela Primaries.
Amtrak's famous Acela train.
It's called the Acela Primary.
Happy Acela Primary Day, sports fans. Today, voters in 5 northeastern states, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Delaware, Rhode Island, and Maryland, get their say in the presidential nomination race, and all signs point to another very victorious evening for Donald J. Trump, billionaire, and Hillary R. Clinton, not quite billionaire. Unless the public polling is way off, the question tonight is not whether the frontrunners will win all 5 contests, but how thumpingly they will do so. At this stage in the race, margin is master. So let's start with the Republican side. There are 172 delegates up for grabs tonight and a whole lot of bragging rights. So Mark, what would make this a great night for Donald Trump? And what would make this a super duper mega mondo night for Donald Trump?
15 contests left. 5 of them are tonight.
Yeah.
These Acela states. Our colleague Steve Yacino has done a brilliant job of crunching the numbers and looked at different scenarios of how Trump could do in the 5 states. Of course, as with all, we've all learned now these states have different rules.
Right.
Under Steve's scenario, and I've cross-checked his work. Trump's worst night.
Good of you to do that.
Trump's worst night, barring some extraordinary surprise we're not expecting. He'll win all 5 states. His worst night gets him over the number that the other campaigns have looked at and said, if he gets that many, he's ahead of the pace. He's closer to being in position to get a majority.
Oh, I'm not going to disagree with you on that. I feel as though, if he is in the worst case scenario, he could be under 100 delegates. Under 100 delegates, he'd still have to get 60%, according to Steve Yacino, of the remaining delegates after tonight. That would make it more of an uphill fight. Whereas,
but he's not going to do that bad. Is the point?
But that's the worst case scenario.
But you look at Maryland. There's some districts around the Washington area.
He's going to do well in Maryland,
where Kasich might pick off some delegates. Given the Rhode Island rules, Trump's not going to win them all.
Yeah.
But other than that, then there's Pennsylvania.
Yes.
So Ben Ginsburg, the noted Republican lawyer and MSNBC analyst,
a friend of ours,
had a little dispute this morning. I say any unpledged delegate who has said publicly, I'm going to vote with my district. Yeah. Any of them who Trump wins their district, I think it would be very hard for them not to vote for Trump on the first ballot. Very hard.
Let me ask you whether
I count them as practically pledged.
Let me ask you whether you think Trump's going to win all of the congressional districts in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I think is the case with a lot of those delegates, and we should just explain this. I guess it's the only confusing thing of the night. 71 delegates in Pennsylvania, 17 winner-take-all statewide. The other 54 are unbound delegates, and I know the bell rang, but those guys, some of them have said what you said. Others have said they're inclined to vote with their congressional district result.
And Trump may lose a district or two, but the point is,
it's a little hinky.
The point
it's
is,
the one thing we're not going to know at the end of the night.
I'm going to count some of the unpledged tonight.
You can do whatever you want.
All right. We've also spent the day crunching the data on the Democratic side. There are, on that side, 384 unpledged delegates at stake tonight, as Hillary Clinton tries to turn more and more her attention to the general election and to Donald J. Trump, billionaire. Bernie Sanders says he's staying in the race until the end, no matter what anyone's advocates suggest. So, John, same question about Clinton. She's going to win tonight big. What would constitute a good night, and what would constitute a super great night for Clinton?
Well, if first of all, she got to win all 5. And although we all assume she's going to win all 5, there's some chance that she could lose Rhode Island. There's a chance of that. Both campaigns concede that point. As you know, Tad Devine in this room suggested that the Sanders campaign had some optimism about Pennsylvania. The public polling still has them about 10 points apart. It's not totally impossible, that Sanders could pull off a Michigan thing in Pennsylvania. If Hillary Clinton lost 1 or 2 states tonight, she would not suffer much in terms of delegates, but she could suffer a fair amount in terms of her being able to just slam the door shut on Sanders rhetorically. That would be a bad night for her. Winning all 5 and winning them all by double digits, that would be a great night. And the delegates thing doesn't matter that much because it's proportional. It's not going to make that difference, not much of a difference either way. It's all more about rhetoric here tonight than about delegates.
That's what I think. I mean, I said unpledged delegates. We're talking about pledged delegates at stake tonight. Yeah. I think for Clinton, she's in Pennsylvania, she's in Philadelphia. Clearly she's going to refer to the convention in her victory night speech. Yeah. To me, this is about the Clinton giving a speech which continues to embrace Sanders supporters, which continues to ease Sanders out of the race, which continues to show appeal to the whole coalition of the Democratic Party, and talk about the themes she wants to run on in the general election.
To be clear, though, there's some news today, some suggestion that Bernie Sanders might, quote, again, reassess. We're now talking a little bit again about reassessing the campaign after tonight's results. And it seems to me that if Hillary Clinton, for instance, won all 5 and won all 5 by double digits, not inconceivable that she could do that, that would give Sanders a kind of pause that would be different than what he would leave if he won one state, or if he kept it really close in all 5.
And it's less in that case. It's less in that case about the momentum and the psychology than just about the math. The Clinton people have been looking forward to this day. If she has on a great night, her greater night,
225 delegates.
225 delegates, then for Sanders to explain how he can be nominated is a much more torturous thing involving delegates, superdelegates, and pledged delegates. At that point, it's possible that what he has not faced up until now, he would start to face, which is real questions about why are you even in this race? Mathematically, it's not there. In a real way, it's not there now, barring some unforeseen circumstances. I don't think that means he'll get him out. I'm not sure that even means he'll ratchet out in his rhetoric, but I do think the Clintons would rather run under those circumstances, with the press believing this is now a completely lost cause.
All right. You know what's really presidential? Twitter trolling at 6:42 in the a.m. That was the hour today that Donald J. Trump, billionaire, took to the social media again to blast the alleged campaign collusion between Ted Cruz and John Kasich in Indiana, where Trump wrote, quote, "The Cruz-Kasich pact is under great strain. This joke of a deal is falling apart, not being honored, and almost dead." And then the patented Trump exclamation, "Very dumb," with the exclamation point. Yesterday, we talked on the show about how the anti-Trump treaty fits nicely into the frontrunners' framing of the race as a rigged deal. But this morning, John Kasich phoned into the Today Show and put forth a vigorous defense of the strategy, the alliance, the pact, as perfectly above board.
Listen, Matt, this whole business is about stopping Hillary Clinton from being president. I have laid out a strategy, and I have not told anybody to not vote for me. I'm just not there campaigning. And you know what? When you don't campaign in certain areas in any kind of a race, guess what? Your turnout goes down. I don't tell people how to vote. I am not in that state right now, but I will be in other states. And I will be at the convention, in a broken convention, trying to become president of the United States, because I have the record and the capability to carry out the job and win in the fall.
So, Mark, I bet John Kasich was happy to see that picture of himself from like 1986 there on the Today Show, looking very young. How do you think Kasich and Cruz are doing at selling this deal now more than 24 hours in?
I continue to be amazed at how poor a job they're doing. Trump's doing a great job attacking it. Yeah. The press agrees with Trump's analysis more and more. And I think the Kasich and Cruz staffs did a good job of putting the deal together belatedly. It was a smart thing to do. But the two candidates continue to act like they're trying to sabotage it. Right. Their rhetoric is about process. They're not turning the attention to issues of care the middle-class voters would care about and working-class voters would care about. I think they have really undermined the possibility that this will work through the candidate's failure to explain this in a way that's optimistic, uplifting, passionate,
horrible,
and away from process.
They've been horrible. They've been horrible in slightly different ways. Cruz has been all the things you've said, which I think is process-driven and negative rather than positive. Kasich has just been defensive and weird and inexplicable. I mean, I think the way Kasich has talked about this has been almost incomprehensibly bad.
There's two possibilities. Either the staff briefed the candidates on what to say. Well, there's three. The staff briefed the candidates what to say, the candidates ignored them. Yeah. Two, they didn't brief them, and the candidates are just out there saying that. Or this is what the staff wanted them to say. Yeah. None of those are good possibilities. They're all bad. I suspect they didn't brief them because these guys are out there just saying stuff.
Look, it's hard to sell something like this in a positive way.
Yes,
you could
hard.
imagine. We
It's
could
hard.
imagine better ways than this for sure. But it is hard to sell this in a positive, uplifting, optimistic way that doesn't end up being on process, because it's a weird thing to do. Not many people are familiar with it. Not many voters have seen it. It would take a lot of communication skills that apparently Ted Cruz
They should
lacking.
have flooded the zone with surrogates.
Of course.
Who said, we're doing this because Donald Trump would be bad for the Republican Party and bad for America. Forget the process. What you need to know is Donald Trump should not be our nominee.
Which, of course, is exactly, in a funny way, like what the best of the rhetoric was. Best, I mean by best, most effective of the rhetoric was in Wisconsin, which should be the model for how this whole thing is going to work.
We want to empower voters to give them the best choices that aren't Donald Trump, because Trump's just talking about voters and they're talking about process. Ooh. All right, when we come back, a do-si-do of gas, a daisy chain of political strategists in both parties. Just wait till you see who we pair up on this show after these words from our sponsors.
A do-si-do and a daisy chain.
Donald Trump, in addition to being a friend, he's a brilliant businessman. He's a great celebrity, knows how to milk that for everything, and he's a good entertainer. So naturally, he's getting a lot of attention from the press and from a lot of angry voters. But no, he will not be president. He will not be the nominee.
What would have to happen for you to say, man, this Trump thing's for real?
He'd have to win. He'd have to go out and win Iowa. He'd have to go out and win New Hampshire.
And today you put the chance of his winning the Iowa caucuses at what percent?
0.
0.
0.
Chance of winning New Hampshire primary?
0.
That was two guys, former McCain advisor Charlie Black, who now is an advisor to John Case's campaign, and former Romney campaign strategist Stuart Stevens, who's not affiliated with any presidential campaign this cycle. Both have been guests on this show before. Both have good senses of humor. And both showed, as you heard, there's some skepticism that Donald Trump would be their party's nominee. So we have them back now to talk about the race. Gentlemen, thank you for joining. You obviously weren't the only two who were doubted that Trump would be the nominee. Charlie, you've known Trump for a long time. Stuart, I don't think you know him at all or very well. Let me start with you, Charlie. What's the single thing you think you underestimated? Obviously, he's not the nominee yet, but he's obviously done better than either of you thought he would. So did you underestimate something about Trump, about the electorate, the other candidates? What?
I underestimated the extent to which the press would let Trump get away with murder and not speak to issues or talk details on issues. And frankly, the electorate is very angry, maybe more angry than I realized. But I still don't think he's going to be the nominee. 62% of Republicans have voted against him in these primaries.
Stuart, what did you get wrong to lead to the conclusion that Trump wouldn't win Iowa, wouldn't win New Hampshire, South Carolina, et cetera?
I thought that there would be a more focused effort on stopping Trump, and not the idea that if you wait one-on-one to get him, that would be a good thing. He did lose Iowa. He was weakened there for a few days. I would have thought that there would have been a concentrated effort among the candidates to focus on Trump and try to stop him. But there was in this crazy lane theory of campaigns where people were trying to win their lanes instead of trying to win their races, and that benefited Trump.
Charlie, if you were listening to this program just a few minutes ago, you would have heard the two hosts here pretty harshly criticizing the way in which your guy, John Kasich, and Ted Cruz have been messaging this alliance that they've put together, how they've been explaining it, how they've been selling it. Tell me whether you think they have done a good job. Make the case for why they've messaged it well.
Well, John, that's nice of you. I am advised by smart people that you just say Donald Trump shouldn't be the nominee because he'd be bad for the country. But listen, this whole thing is a feeding frenzy. These are typical tactics in multi-candidate races. It's happened all the time for years. You know, as recently as last month at the Michigan Republican Convention, the Trump forces colluded with the Kasich forces to deny delegates and committee spots to Mr. Cruz. Now, I didn't hear a lot of gnashing of teeth out of Donald about that. So, you know, maybe these guys are tired of answering the question, but that's it. Donald Trump would be bad for the country, and the fact is that he can still be stopped. But if we have limited resources, it's smart not to have both campaigns spread them thinly across the same state. Plain and simple.
But Charlie, don't you think that John Kasich, just listening to him talk about it, saying, you know, well, I'm not telling my voters what to do, and this is just about allocating resources, and yet talking about what he's done for the last day, as far as I can hear, is talk about process mostly, and not really make anything like as compelling an argument, even as you just made. It just doesn't seem like he really had a clear idea about how to go out and sell what is for most voters a relatively complicated thing, even though you're right that there are these kind of tactics that take place behind closed doors all the time.
John Kasich does not like the talk process, and he doesn't like to get into it. He'd much rather talk about issues, his record, where he wants to take the country in the future. He's not as comfortable talking process. But listen, this doesn't matter. No voters are going to decide to vote against either one of these guys because they didn't message correctly for 24 hours.
Stuart, was this deal a good idea for the Stop Trump effort?
Sure. Yeah. You know, I tend to think that Indiana is the most important of these. I think it's important that Cruz wins Indiana. And I think when you kind of cut through this, the most important thing is that John Kasich isn't putting a big effort in Indiana and isn't really campaigning there. And if you're a voter sitting home in Indiana, that's probably what's going to sink home the most to you, that this is a Cruz-Trump choice. And that, I think, will benefit Cruz. We'll see. But I think that's going to be the real test here in a week. And if Cruz wins, that'll be good for those of us who don't want Trump. And if he doesn't, that'll be bad for us.
Charlie, you've been very close to Paul Manafort, your partner, long time, and Mr. Trump you've known for a long time as well. Tell us what you make of their new alliance.
Well, I think it was very smart of Donald to bring Paul in. He's a very experienced manager and also an experienced convention guy. The jury's out on whether his advice will be taken, but it was a smart move on Donald's part, and Paul hasn't done this in a few years, so welcome back, Paul, and good luck with that candidate.
Yeah, and from your perspective, what's in it for Paul Manafort?
Well, Paul likes the game. He enjoys politics. He's participated in many of these conventions over the years. He just hasn't done one lately, but I'm sure he believes in the guy and would like to get another win here. But nevertheless, I think he's going to have difficulty even getting the nomination.
Charlie,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Stuart, you know Paul Manafort as well. Do you think his skills are something that's going to make Trump's chances of winning not just the nomination, but if he's the nominee, the general election more likely?
Yes. Listen, I think you have to give Donald Trump credit here for realizing that the team he had wasn't a team that could get him to glory and making changes. I have tremendous respect for Paul Manafort. One thing about, I think, you can say about Paul is he will respect the difficulty of the task. And everybody who goes through this process is ultimately humbled by it. If you win or you lose, and I've done both. And you have to approach it with the gravity of the undertaking. And I think Paul is someone who will do that. And now, the problem is he has to change an entire culture. And there has been a culture around Trump that is completely antithetical to getting along with others when they need to get along with others, antithetical to the idea that they're going to win through addition.
Stuart, I'm sorry.
That's a problem.
I got to cut you off. We're going to say goodbye to Charlie Black. Charlie, thank you very much for joining us. Want to have you back soon.
Thank you,
Stuart's going to stay with us. Charlie's going to hand the baton off in this Hall of Fame strategist relay to a guy in the other L.A., James Carville in Louisiana, will join us with Stuart Stevens right after this.
We're joined again by former Romney chief strategist Stuart Stevens, who's not backing any candidates in this cycle. And with us now, joining him, is the Ragin' Cajun, the guy who's squinting for Clinton. That would be James Carville down there in NOLA. Gentlemen, good to see you. James, we've just been discussing the pact, the alliance between Cruz and Kasich on the Republican side. Just from a distance, the Democratic distance that you exist in, does that look like smart politics to you, strategically and tactically, in terms of stopping Trump?
You know, when you're behind, you do things and nothing looks very smart. When you're behind, and they're behind, and they tried to do something, and it just didn't come off very well. But you know, you just don't want to sit there and get your brains beat in. You're going to try something, and it was kind of 4th and 72, and they didn't want to punt, so they flung it up in the air. It didn't. Wasn't the most elegant pass I've ever seen, but I can't blame them for trying. They were just up against the wall. They got to try something.
Stuart, let's just assume that Donald Trump, that this pact plays out over the course of the next few weeks. We go towards June 7th at this point. What's your prediction now? Is your view that Donald Trump is more likely than not to get to 1,237 delegates by June 8th?
Well, you'd rather be Trump in this process than anybody else. It's like a recount. You'd rather be ahead going in. I think probably the best bet is that Trump is going to be short after California. I think Indiana is going to be very important here. The up and downside of tonight isn't that great. Trump's going to have a good night, even in the worst-case scenario. I would bet that Trump is probably going to be 100-plus delegates short after California. That would be my bet.
Stuart, would you still think that if Trump won Indiana?
I think if Trump wins Indiana, it will be very psychologically problematic for those opposing Trump.
Stuart, I want to move over to the Democrats before we have you hand the baton off. So I ask you this. How would you handicap a possible Clinton-Trump general election?
Oh, Clinton will crush Trump. There's no question. Look, and just focus on one stat, white women. Romney won white women by 14. Trump is losing white women. With Hispanics, Republican Hispanics, there's not that many of them, unfortunately, and Trump has a 60% unfavorable.
Doesn't have the prospect of campaigning and turning some of those numbers around?
I don't think it's very good because Trump is so well known. I mean, Ted Cruz is losing to Hillary, but losing by 3. Trump's losing by 10. That's a big difference. It could be the United States Senate. Plus, you know, people don't know Cruz as well as Trump. Trump's been around forever. His negatives are really high, and those who are for him are very passionate about him, but those who are against him are very passionate. There's not a lot of wishy-washy there to move around in a campaign. So I think it'll be just an absolute cakewalk for Hillary Clinton.
James, when you look at the prospect, I know you'll say that you think that Hillary Clinton is the prohibitive favorite against Donald Trump if that's her opponent, but what do you think is the main thing she has to worry about in that race? What would be the thing you'd be most concerned about facing Trump as an opponent?
I mean, you know, we're in a change environment and a change electorate, and I think that the thing that she has to do, and she will do, to say that she represents change, you know, the right kind of change. I mean, you know, I think that I agree with Stuart. I mean, Trump goes in with a lot to overcome, and I just think that she's got to execute and talk about the things that she wants to do, how she wants to make the country different, and how she can be for change also. I think that's her biggest challenge, and I think she'll be fine.
And you think there's no way in which you think Trump, given his volatility, that might be something that would be psychologically destabilizing for her? Just real quick.
Let me tell you, everybody wants to say Trump always got a chance and everything. You know, as I pointed out, this political thing started with birtherism, which is the most asinine, racist thing since George Wallace ran for president.
James,
and it's time that somebody call him on it.
I'm going to cut you off. You're going to have a chance to come back. Stuart Stevens, thanks for doing this. James Carville, you stay there. Democratic strategist Anita Dunn will join us right when we come back.
it would be a great idea to have a woman as vice president, and something I would give very, very serious thought to.
Are there any women in particular you think would be qualified for that job?
Are there any women? Yes, there are many women who would be
Could you name a couple?
for that job. No, I think it's a little bit early to be speculating on that. But I think, you know, as you know, there are people in life that Elizabeth Warren, I think, has been a real champion in standing up for working families, taking on Wall Street.
That was Senator Bernie Sanders on Morning Joe this morning. We're back now with longtime Clinton ally James Carville, who's in New Orleans, and joining us from our Washington bureau, former White House communications director in the Obama administration, Anita Dunn, who is not affiliated with either of the presidential campaigns this year. Anita, thank you for joining in, taking the baton handoff from Stuart Stevens. Let me start with you. If you were advising the Clinton campaign, if Hillary Clinton called you up and said, what is the best proper role for Bernie Sanders and his supporters at my convention, assuming she gets a majority, what would you tell her that role should be?
I would tell her, let him make his primetime speech. Let him talk directly to this country about the differences between the two parties. Mark, as you know, primaries are about fighting for the direction of a political party, but general elections are about fighting for the direction of an entire nation. And I think that Senator Sanders' primetime speech convention, let him lay out the indictment of the Republicans and the difference between the two political parties and speak directly to his supporters and the people who've been attracted to his message. But she's not calling me for advice.
Yeah. James, what's the best role from the Clinton point of view if she's the nominee for Senator Sanders in Philadelphia?
Well, I mean, it's going to be her convention, but generally the other candidates will be allowed to speak, and you know, I'm sure that all that'll be negotiated, you know, going into the convention. But I sure wouldn't discount the possibility that Sanders would have a speech and a speech at an important time during the convention. He's got a lot of vote. He's registered a lot of people. These are people that the Democratic Party needs to, and they need to be spoken to. I mean, I don't have a problem with that.
James, I'll stay with you just because you're obviously you're for Hillary Clinton. One thing that is clear, is that Senator Sanders had spoken to young Democrats, young voters, in a way much more powerfully than Secretary Clinton has so far. What can she take from Bernie Sanders? What can she learn from him? What does she have to do to get the affection, the enthusiasm of those voters?
Well, I'm around young people a lot. You know, I'm a college professor now. And I think Sanders, you know, it has a critique of the system that is, in my opinion, and in opinion of a lot of other people, is kind of superficial, but it's appealing to people, and they're coming in the party and they have enthusiasm. And I think any political party wants young people like this. I mean, I think Democrats have a huge advantage with people under 35, and he'll make it better. And part of her ability as a presidential candidate is going to be to incorporate these people and have them as enthusiastic members of the Democratic Party, which I hope she can do. And I think she can, but it's going to require some political skill. It's going to require some dexterity. It's going to require some patience, and I think all of those things that she'll demonstrate that she has.
Anita, you and I have talked in the past about what are the issues that matter to millennial voters. What can Hillary Clinton do while staying true to herself on policy and in terms of her temperament and tenor to be able to connect to those voters?
You know, I think it's interesting because the issues that Bernie Sanders is talking about are issues that I think Hillary Clinton is very comfortable talking about. I mean, Hillary Clinton has about 30 years of experience of what happens when you have moneyed interests ganging up against progressive issues like health care, for example. She can speak to that about as well as anybody. I think that she can speak to education about as well as anybody. She led education reform when she was the First Lady of Arkansas. You know, what Hillary Clinton has is a lot of areas of agreement with Bernie Sanders, and she also has a passion for a lot of the things that he's been talking about in terms of, you know, making lives better for regular people. I think that's what needs to come through in the general election. I think what James was saying is absolutely right, which is she needs to talk to them, but at the same time, I think she's got a lot to say.
Right. I think that these young people, like a lot of people, I think Anita would agree with this, they think the system is rigged, and she's got to convince them that she understands that, and she's about leveling this playing field. I mean, that she's going to be an advocate for a point of view. People around the country, and particularly young people, think the system is being corrupted by money. and she's got to be able to speak to that and speak to it with some passion. I think she can do that. I think she believes that. And I think that they're going to have to do that. She's got to talk about that, because that's what young people think. They think this thing is rigged and stacked and bought off. And, and to some extent, I can't blame them.
Anita, once upon a time, there was a war room in Little Rock, Arkansas that had a sign on the wall that said, change versus more of the same. Don't forget health care. And the other one was, it's the economy, stupid. That one got a lot of attention. What are the 3 things that should be tacked on the wall of the Clinton war room for the general election if she's the nominee?
I don't think those 3 things are a bad place to start, to be honest. Change versus more of the same. I would change that a little, which is change versus going backwards. More of the same versus going backwards. I think that the way that she's going to match up against Republicans, the second is, it is the economy, but it's about jobs, it's about your life. And the third is, it's about them, okay? It's about the people. And I think that those 3 things, not dissimilar to what James tacked up in his war room in 1992, are really the kind of core precepts moving forward.
James, we've got just less than a minute left. Right. What would you put up in the war room in Brooklyn?
I would say that the change that we're going to bring about is we're going to have a government that works for you. And we're going to take on the kind of people that are working against you. And people got to feel like, it's a level playing field out there, and I'm going to level it for you. I'm going to be your person in the White House. And all of those things count. And he's right. It's a change versus going back. I mean, Trump wants to take us back to 1958. That's not the way to go. But I think she's got to do that, and she's got to talk about how she wants to level the playing field and how all of her life has been about being an agent of change and being on the cutting edge of change. And I think she can do that very effectively. I look forward to watching her do it.
James Carville, one thing I will say for you is you've lost some of your pithiness since 1992, because none of that's quite as pithy as The Economy's Stupid. But it was great to have you on today. Anita Dunn, always great to have you on. If you're watching us in Washington, D.C., we got to see these lovely people on the television. You could also hear them on the radio at Bloomberg 99.1 FM, and we'll be right back. Here now are 2 of our Bloomberg Politics colleagues, senior White House reporter Margaret Talev, and our man on the Republican convention coverage and much else on the GOP side. That would be John McCormick. Lady, gentlemen, good to see you. Margaret, Hillary Clinton is going to do what if she wins as big tonight as people assume she's going to win, she's going to do what in terms of how she handles Bernie Sanders?
Hopefully, because what she's trying to do is figure out how to bring them along, she will manage to finesse a message that at once makes herself more inevitable and has a touch of grace for him and for his supporters. Something that allows him to feel good about himself, something that allows his fans to feel okay about her, while making clear, as she did a little more clumsily the night before on MSNBC, that she's winning.
So Donald Trump wins 5 tonight, let's say. Are we going to have finesse from Donald Trump of the kind that Margaret is suggesting we might get from Hillary Clinton?
I think we might get finesse tonight and tomorrow morning. It's sort of an interesting day tomorrow for Trump because he needs to be statesman in the morning, and then he needs to be showman in the evening when he goes to Indiana with Bobby Knight. So it's going to be one of those days for Trump where you're going to get the full, spectrum of the candidate in this new evolved persona.
This deal between Cruz and Kasich has put a spotlight on a reality which existed before but is now really heightened, which is if Trump wins Indiana, is it the case that the air is going to come completely out or almost completely out of the Stop Trump movement?
Yeah, no, I think it's a huge state, obviously. And if I were Cruz, I would be praying for a massive thunderstorm over the state of Indiana tonight to knock out the power, the cable, the internet, so that they don't hear anything about the results in these primaries tonight. I don't think that's probably going to happen. But it's just there's so little time between tonight and that primary. It's going to be very difficult to change the dynamics of the race in 6 days.
What is on Hillary Clinton's to-do list? We talk about her turning to the general election. She's got to pick a running mate, plan the convention. How do you suspect she will spend this time between now and the convention, obviously with the break point coming in first week of June after the last voting?
Yeah, I think they're looking at a few potential break points, right? And one is once all the news organizations stop paying attention to Bernie Sanders, right? That's one. Second is endorsements that aren't out yet. Third is Sanders himself. She's waiting for him to meet her, maybe not halfway, but like 20% of the way, right? It affects how she can react, how she can move things forward. But they've got to balance on her side 2 things. Number one is, how does she get things right with him? And number two is this Trump thing, and that
Right. So talk about today. The Sanders hits her for being friends with Donald Trump. That's like not in the spirit of ratcheting down. Right?
It's a picture, a photograph, right, of both of the Clintons with a newly
First time he's wielded that particular
weapon, right?
Boy, it was
incredible. And right at a time when he knows that she's trying to calibrate how to reach out to him and his supporters using language like traitor in this news release, it was pretty aggressive. And at the same time, more signs from Tad Devine, from his strategist, that there may be some sort of a reassessment after tonight. And so it's really mixed messaging, and it's hard for her to figure out kind of how to dance. He's sort of all over the map. He's left some small openings to suggest that he's beginning to rethink it, and that every time he almost gets there, it's like, kapow,
We keep waiting for a trigger for more people like Chris Christie and Jeff Sessions to get on board the Trump train, prominent people. I don't suspect it's going to happen after tonight, Northeast, but could we see that after Indiana?
Yeah, I mean, I think if he wins big in Indiana, that could start to happen. Personally, I thought the contested convention thing was fairly likely 3 weeks ago, like 70%, something like that, but I'm sort of down under 50%. I know you two gentlemen are still sort of split on that topic, but to me, it's feeling like a probably less than 50% probability at this point.
I think it's pretty close to binary. If Trump wins Indiana, I think he gets there. If he doesn't win Indiana, I don't know that he will. I think the numbers add up that way.
We're now in alignment.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. Good. Okay.
And there's probably not going to be a ton of polling.
Except I think he still can if he loses Indiana.
I think he still can, but I think it's really hard. It's really pretty hard. Let me ask you this question, though, just because you were down at the RNC meeting last week, right? And there was a lot of discussion about how Paul Manafort and the charm offensive down there went. Since then, there's been walking back. There's been reports of turmoil in the Trump world about things that Trump feels about things that Manafort said down there. How does that all play with delegates as they look at what seems to be a very unstable situation and RNC members?
I think RNC members, went away from that gathering, feeling somewhat reassured, but still very skeptical. And so they're going back to their state parties, and their state parties are asking them about what's going on with this Trump situation, what's going to happen in Cleveland, are we going, So it's, I think it's going to be, he's going to need to continually reassure the party establishment. And, some of these delegates have been picked, many of them haven't yet.
I see a lot of news releases that Bill Clinton's doing events. I never hear anything that he says. He doesn't make the news. Former President of the United States.
That's probably a good thing.
But have you been covering him lately? Have you been watching? Why is it that he's making no news?
I think they're probably trying very hard to keep him from making news right now, because the last few times he's making news, he's really taken her off message.
Right.
So close to the finish line right now from their perspective. The goal is just to stay out of trouble, through tonight, through maybe another state or two. She's going to be within a couple hundred points after tonight.
So on the Clinton and Robbie Mook, Mook and John Podesta, when they're sitting down and writing their list of troubles, what's on their list of troubles right now?
You mean, is Bill Clinton on their list of troubles?
Well, no, just anything. I mean, it seems like things are going pretty well for them right now.
Actually, things are going great for them right now, by all accounts, and she's having trouble sort of containing how good she feels about that. There is still, of course, the FBI investigation out there, and now some chance that it will not be resolved in as timely a fashion as earlier thought. It's still a big thing that's hanging out
Always
there.
with the G-men.
It is.
Our thanks to Margaret Talev, resplendent in the color of money over there, and John McCormick, slightly less resplendent in a Navy coat.
Midwestern
You
dress.
look good. He does look great,
Look really
fantastic, but not color of money. Anyway, coming up, we're going to talk about independent presidential candidates in a two-party world after this very brief, itty-bitty break.
John and I recently sat down with Peter Ackerman. He's the chairman of the group known as Level the Playing Field. It wants to make it easier for third-party or independent candidates to participate in presidential debates. He was also the founder of Americans Elect, which fought to get an independent ticket on the presidential ballot in 2012 for the general election. We started off by asking Mr. Ackerman if the success of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders this year runs contrary to his argument that the two-party process is closed off to outsiders.
If you look at Bernie Sanders, you look at Donald Trump, the thing that they don't have together is that they don't represent an independent voice that's simultaneously attractive to Democrats that are moderate, Republicans that are moderate, and independents together. That coalition is not represented in either of them, and what we really need is a pathway so people who can represent that coalition have a fair chance to compete.
Are you sure that there's room for someone to be a distinctive voice and an important voice between the two major parties as opposed to Bernie Sanders on the left and Donald Trump on the populist right?
Well, I think when you try to conceptualize the third as fitting in the ideological crease between them, you're really missing the point. An independent today basically has a whole range of preferences tempered by intensity of feeling about those preferences. And when you put that all together in terms of portfolio of interests and desires, they find the two parties are really unsuitable to match one or the other to match what they really want. So this is why 80% of the country today would love to see a viable third.
People remember Americans Elect and what it was trying to do, get a third-party independent candidacy, create ballot access, get people on the ballot. Talk about level the playing field and how it grew out of that experience and what you're actually trying to do right now.
Well, when we created Americans Elect, the idea was to create an internet-based voting system that would nominate a nonpartisan ticket, not Republican, not Democrat, that would be on the ballot in all 50 states. And we got a lot of that done. We did the largest signature drive in history. We basically created the ability for 40 million people to vote. But frankly, and this was my problem as the leader, is I underestimated the difficulty in getting into the debates. And so when we went to candidates and asked them to consider running, and they go to their friends in the two parties and ask, well, what do you think of that? And they would find that they had a finger point in their chest saying that'll be bad for you. They come back to me and say, hey, Pete, you know, it's great to be able to try this for the first time, but if I put myself out, I'm going to get a lot of negative blowback. If I win, I'm going to be on the ballot, which is cool, but how do I get into the debates? And after 2.5 years of trying, I didn't plan. I just thought it was easier than it was. What we found was that there is mathematically no chance of somebody getting into the debates who wasn't a Democrat or Republican or an independent that can completely self-fund, and even they would have huge risks of hurdling what's required to be in the debates. And so if I said to your viewers right now, let's create a law that only Democrats or Republicans for the pendency of our republic can be president, I'd say every one of your viewers, without exception, would say, well, that's a terrible idea, it's unconstitutional, it's probably an obnoxious thing to suggest. But mathematically, because of the way the debate rules are structured, that's precisely what we're going to get. And right now we are fighting that. We have a motion for summary judgment against the Federal Election Commission to force the rules to be changed.
Right, so level the playing field is really just strictly focused on the debate issue.
And the things that come before it that have the logical adjunct of that, for example, the ballot access rules and the imbalances, for example, in how you can raise money. So if you're a Democrat or Republican, as George Clooney indicated, you can raise $834,000 a person. But if you're an independent, you can raise $2,700 a person. And so if you have to go out and get on the ballot, which Democrats and Republican nominees don't, in every single state, it's a $15 million bill. I've been through it. I know it when it's all in. So if you're really at $2,700, the reality is you're gathering, if you're 4 times better than Bernie Sanders, $100 a person. That means before you get any name recognition, you have to sit down with people like I am with you now, and you'd have to sit down with 150,000 people, assuming they'd all say yes. If half said yes, it's 300,000. That's why no individual who is not a billionaire has ever made it on the ballot for president. And that is a defect in our system that really, in this day and age, must be rectified.
I understand what you're doing, and as I suggested before, I have great intellectual sympathy for it. But isn't the reality that however much progress you have, until there's a person who can actually do this, has the political abilities, the kind of issues matrix, the funding capacity, either self-funding or the ability to raise money like Bernie Sanders, nothing you do will matter. And if there is such a person, you might be paving the way for them, but they won't really need this. They'll be able to, on their own, make these things happen.
Well, under the current rules, there's no chance. So let's take your Bernie Sanders. You know, Bernie Sanders was asked by your friend Chuck Todd, well, you are an independent socialist. Why are you running as a Democrat? And he said, because you wouldn't be interviewing me today. You've also noted that Donald Trump has gotten $2 billion of free earned media. When you go through the two parties, you have a process that you follow brilliantly, for the both of you, to a normal conclusion of anticipation of events, and you talk about it every day, and that creates earned media that allows an orderly...
Stop you. Take Trump. Had Trump decided last May that he wanted to get on all 50 state ballots and run as an independent and was willing to spend his own money and raise some money, he would meet every standard. Well, he'd be on all 50 ballots. He'd be in the debates.
Well, let's see if that's true. I think the important takeaway here is that, just like we're seeing now with the two parties, is that we're now seeing how obscure rules that we don't see, that we don't think about until the moment we need to think about them, actually can impact an election so much so that people in the abstract at the end or before now can say this is a rigged game or it's not democratic.
Our thanks to Peter Ackerman. John and I will be right back. Funny, funny. Check out BloombergPolitics.com for all the primary results this evening. Coming up on Bloomberg West, Emily Chang speaks to the T-Mobile CEO, John Ledger. On tomorrow's program here, our pals at Purple Strategy, Steve McMahon and Alex Castellanos, will join us in Washington. Until then,
Hey, there's one last thing before we go.
Yeah.
Last night in my home borough, Bruce Springsteen in concert at the Barclays Center. The governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, former presidential candidate, was spotted gyrating in the audience by not one but several cell phone cameras. In the annals of history, this Christie in motion is right next to his orange sweater celebration at that Cowboys game. Governor Christie, just remember, when we're out in the street, we'll be waiting for you.
Now, sayonara.